Hello, everybody. All right, well, light on people, so we'll wait a few minutes to start. The way I plan to do this is essentially alpha order by first names, the way Zoom listed in the participants, with the exception of I have one person who's asked to go first. Other than that, we'll just go alpha by first names. Well, that was a mad rush. There were 14 people and now there are 21. Awesome. Y'all are very prompt. I appreciate that. We are still missing a few people, so again, we'll wait a couple minutes. We'll get started around 11:34, 11:35. And then, yeah, we'll just go through. I'm not planning to like formally time y'all. I'm just hoping you're pretty good about keeping yourself around 5 minutes-ish. If I feel like someone's going really long, I might type in the chat like, wrap it up. But this doesn't have to be super formal in terms of, hitting a certain time mark or anything like that. And just so you know how I'm grading, I literally have, there we go, the rubric printed out that's on your syllabus, and I'm just scoring you on that. So no surprises at all. Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started. So India needs to go first, so I was glad to give her that. And then one thing I'll say before we start is our air conditioning is broken, which is lovely when it's going to be 92 today. And they are coming at some point today to bring us temporary units until they can get all our equipment in and install it on Friday. So if I suddenly disappear in the middle of your presentation, no worries, I'm recording them and I'll just go back later. So again, hopefully, okay, so India's going first just because she actually has to leave early. Then we're gonna go in alpha order by first names, okay? It's just gonna make it faster. Unless someone like really needs to leave, India has herself double booked. So that's the only reason I'm doing it that way. It's because it's gonna be so much easier than trying to like devise an order in the chat. So like private chat me if there's a reason you need to go earlier and I'm glad to accommodate you. So yeah, if I disappear, know that I'm coming back and that I can go back and watch your presentation later and catch up everything I might have missed. So hopefully I'll only be gone for like 2 minutes to get him introduced. So
you said alphabetically by first name, right?
Our first name. Yeah, basically if you look at the participants list, that's the order we're going to go in. Just because it's the easiest, we can all just see the order. The only time it changes is when someone's talking, they'll pop up to the top. And obviously I'm not going, so you skip over me in the list when I'm not at the top. Alrighty. So when you go, all of you should be able to screen share if you do have slides. Remember, you didn't have to have slides, so don't freak out if you don't have them. And okay, So I do have one more person who actually has to leave early. Does anyone else have to leave early? If so, chat me. Again, I'd really like you to, all right, screw it. My gentle heart isn't going to make you all go in alpha order. If you are, it doesn't seem like that's going to work. So, okay, here's what we're going to do. So India's going to go first. And then because she asked, Naila's going second. And then Greta and CJ are presenting together, so they'll go third. And then Michaela has asked to go fourth. Alrighty. And then Kenzie and Jackie and Carly. And then Alexis. And some people are presenting together just because they did their volunteering together. So that's why that we don't have to listen to the same description multiple times. Alrighty. So that is through 6. So why don't we take a pause there from the order? And then we can, after the 6th person goes, after Alexis goes, we can sort of sort who wants to go next, or if we want to go to alpha order at that point. Casita, that should also hopefully give you enough time to get home before you present. So I saw your chat about that. So she just got off work. So thank you for, hanging with this entire semester, including all this craziness. I've told my abnormal class this morning, think of all the skills you have now in terms of your ability to do things on Zoom and whatnot. So, make sure if you're going out and interviewing for jobs, you talk that up. Yes, I've presented over Zoom. I've done discussion groups. I've done it all. So, alrighty, so let's turn it on over to India. I'm going to mute myself, but I'll leave my video on so you can see when I'm here, when I'm not. And go ahead and get started whenever you're ready.
Okay, can you all hear me? Bet. So first of all, I'm outside, so my bad if nature is naturing too much. I'm just also working at the same time. Okay, so I ended up dividing my service between 2 different places, my hours, because of some stuff that happened. I couldn't finish it at the first place. But the first place I started at was this place in DC. It's a nonprofit called Smile, and it's an organization that aims to help LGBTQ plus youth in the metropolitan area as much as they possibly can. So they offer a variety of different services, like housing assistance and after school programming and things like that. And the person who I volunteered for is actually a friend of mine, and they run the youth programming department. So that's what I did, because in the start of the pandemic, they were having trouble finding programs for their students to do that were quarantine friendly, as well as entertaining. And they ended up losing a lot of students through that. And so they had asked for some help, and I offered, and all I really ended up doing was researching some online games and activities and things that they can do, which I didn't think would be that bad, but it took me 4 hours to get a good enough list of things that these teenagers can do that was both accessible and entertaining and fit the criteria that I was given. I wasn't able to see how it worked out, but they said that it helped a lot. And so I was like, all right, cool. Where I got the rest of my hours from was actually by collecting things that I do in Wesleyan Engaged that I don't get paid for. And so, yes, I do work there, but there are a bunch of things that I end up not getting paid for because of how many jobs Brian has. I mean, he has 1 job, and he has 12 titles. So he runs Wesleyan Engaged, and he's a chief diversity officer for the school and a bunch of other things. And so what I ended up doing with him is sometimes I kind of acted like a little assistant of sorts. So whenever there's anything that he may want a second pair of eyes on, I'm the person who ends up looking at it. So when he's developing new programs and things like that, he'll share his plans with me and ask for a student's perspective to make sure that at least someone can understand where students are coming from when things happen, because it's not a conversation that's commonly had. So he asked me to make sure it's there. And the biggest use of my time was serving as a student representative for the President's Council for Inclusive Communities that he as in President Miller, restarted last summer. It started this year, but it was like apparently a thing, I guess. But basically we met for an hour, like every 2 weeks, starting in the fall semester. And during these meetings, my job was also to explain why we're so reserved when it comes to administration and faculty on campus, and let them know what the issue was from both my own experiences and what other students have said to me, as well as continue to give a student perspective. I wasn't the only one there. There were a couple different students who were there, but consistently there was only me and one other student who went. With all those being said, like in the PCIC meetings, we talked about that survey that went out that I can never remember the name of, but that little survey that went out a couple weeks ago. We did that. We ended up making a biased incident report for anything that goes on campus. There aren't really cops on campus, but just so students and faculty have like something, if they need to report something, it's somewhere that they can go instead of just going security who may or may not actually understand how to help, because it also isn't really mandatory for people to have certain trainings for things. It's just security, not knocking them, just some people don't know what to do. And so with all of that and all of the legal stuff that I had to learn, that's how I related it to psych and law, specifically with the PCIC, because through there I had an opportunity to learn more about the Federal Education Rights and Protections Act. So FERPA, that's the thing of whenever things happen, different events and controversies have happened on campus, when we don't get certain information, it's because of FERPA, because there are some things that we legally cannot know unless you're involved. And even then, so if you're involved, it's kind of like still a need to know thing. In understanding how like the politics work on a college campus and how that goes into legal standards, like things with your names, like for LGBT students, if you have a different name that may not be legally changed, like while you can't get your name changed on your ID, you can still have something done like given to faculty and staff, and there'll be like a pronoun thing later, but that was a new thing I did. That's not something I did during the time of when I was accumulating my hours. But one of the hardest things to navigate around is figuring out what to do with it and where to go, because I was also very fresh to all of this. I had no idea what I was doing. I was kind of just winging it as I went. But I'm glad that I did it, because it was something that I've wondered about for a while. And something that I know a lot of people wonder about is why do the school, or why does the school run the way that they do? But both of the groups that I ended up volunteering at hold roots in like betterment for whatever their target area is, like their target demographic, I mean. And going to volunteer for both of these helped me like understand different things, but also helped me not reevaluate, but look into the things that I believe in, like both legally, professionally, and all those kinds of things. It was difficult to do during COVID and social distancing, but it got done, and I'm thankful for it. Thank you.
All right, great job. Thank you for sharing. All right, so next up on my list, I have Naila.
Hello, can you hear me? All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay. Slideshow. Play from start. Okay. Hi guys, my name is Naila Izard, and this is my service learning presentation. So a bit about me. I'm a double major in psychology, and I'm a criminal justice major as well. I'm a senior graduating this Saturday. The site I worked at was In Faith Psychological Services, which is a Black-owned private forensic psychology practice owned by Dr. Janelle Plemmer. And the site is located in Chesapeake, Virginia, off Crossways Boulevard in Greenbrier. I worked there as an intern from November 2019 until about April 2020. And when the pandemic hit, that's kind of when my internship ended. Luckily, Dr. Plemmer is having me back this summer as an intern again. Here are some skills that I gained. Dr. Plemmer has had me practice a lot of these different tests with different cases from the past, and sometimes even giving my input on current cases that she was dealing with. I was also able to assist in conducting intakes, and I got to perform different write-ups for clinical intakes and WASI 2 summaries. So here is a bit on my relation of my internship to class. Can you guys see this, or can you see my face on the Zoom? Okay, there we go. All right. Okay, so most of Dr. Plummer's clients are court ordered, and in some cases she has to testify in court to summarize some of her findings. And in class, we discuss testifying in court as a forensic psychologist and the knowledge that they possess to back up their claims. She also covers psychological evaluations for alleged victims. And I always end up talking about my internship in this class. So I didn't really realize how much it related to this class until I was actually in it. And it's crazy how I took these two things at two separate times, but I feel like I'm in the same thing. Okay, there we go. All right. This establishment usually has court-ordered clients, which need psychological evaluation for court cases. And I feel like that's a direct relation to psychology and law because this is a forensic psychology practice. Here are some similarities to the class. We had some similarities in some of the evaluations that we discussed in class, like getting some practice on the WAIS and the WASI and the PSI and the PCI and the trauma inventory, which was my personal favorite. We also had court testimonials, which are rare, but they were discussed. And Dr. Plummer did discuss with me if a case gets more serious, she might have to go in and prove her case. And forensic psychology, because it's a forensic psychology firm. Here are some differences from class. So we had clinical intakes, and I didn't realize that they could be performed over the phone too, because I thought that was a confidentiality thing where people can record phone calls and certain information is supposed to be like doctor-patient confidentiality. But obviously with COVID, a lot of that stuff has changed, and we have ways of making sure that people don't record certain things. And we don't really spend as much time with the clients, even pre-COVID. You know, we just kind of go over the basics and do the intake, but it's not really too crazy on like, oh yeah, we have to see you every week, because they're court-ordered clients for specific cases. So we have to move on to the next case. We also didn't really use the MMPI too much. We didn't really talk about it like that. She kind of had me focusing on bipolar disorder a lot, because a lot of the clients that come in end up having bipolar disorder, which is why they end up being there, because of the crimes that they sometimes get involved in because of that. And yeah, she didn't really go over profiling too much either. And that's my presentation. Thank you, Dr. Myers and Dr. Plummer, and thank you guys all for listening today. That is it.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, that does really dovetail with this class quite well.
Yes. Thank you guys
And I'm
again.
so glad to work with her again this summer. I hadn't heard anything back from her after I provided the information, so I'm glad that.
Yeah, I start but 2 days after graduation. So I'll be right back. Yeah.
Alrighty, next up are Greta and CJ.
So me and CJ decided to do our service learning project, doing a donation drive on campus for the Samaritan House. And we kind of really did this because we couldn't really find any other sites that could take us on for a short amount of like hours, or like things that like wouldn't take the whole semester to get training on. And I already had like some background info and like communications with the Samaritan House here in Virginia Beach. So I just thought it would be a really good fit. So just like some background information, the Samaritan House is a nonprofit organization, and they help foster adults and their children if they do have children. And it's mostly women who've been affected by sexual and domestic violence, human trafficking, and homelessness. And the services that they provide include housing those in need and providing resources such as case management, counseling, victim advocacy, medical care access, and vocational training. And since the organization is nonprofit, they do rely and appreciate donations. So that's why we did the donation drive, because if you have a nonprofit, they don't receive a lot of funding from the government. So to keep them up and running, they do rely a lot on people's donations, like funding and stuff like that. So we did get a lot of donations, and we got a lot more than we were expecting. So I'm really excited that I get to drop them off today there, because I didn't think we were going to get this many. And basically, like the process to like walk through like what we did, we reached out to student activities to set up a table in Baden just to spread the word of the Samaritan House, to tell them why we were running the drive and what it does to like help the Samaritan House. And then afterwards we sanitized all the donations that we got, and right now they're sitting in the back of my car getting ready to get dropped off today. And that was basically what the drive consisted of the past month.
And for on to the next point of how did the service learning experience relate to psychology and law? The Samaritan House relates back to psychology and relates back to the class because it deals with mental health of its clients and anyone that comes into the facility. And like Greta said, it goes into case management counseling. And that usually, and like Greta said, it's usually women, but it also can be children who have also been in domestic problems at home.
So one point that we could also relate to class as well was civil assessment. So a scenario I used in my paper was that a mother's fleeing from her home where she's being domestically assaulted regularly by her husband. So she reaches out to the Samaritan House for like aid and basically like getting all like these legal resources that she wouldn't gain like being at home in her situation. They would do civil assessments for the child who would need the mother to have full custody for her to put him in a safe environment. So basically they would get her in touch with like different like legality resources, and they would do different assessments for the child and like what's in the best needs of the child, and basically just like assess all of, like these different things. And that's how like the mother could like help her child through the Samaritan House, because they do also help with legal cases that affect the children too that are involved in these domestic cases.
Another point, it could be related back to chapter 6 that deals with victims of abuse. The Samaritan House, the Samaritan House is there to put people in a safe environment and also give them help if they need it.
And that's all we really had prepared for you. And just a heads up, they're always collecting donations. So you can basically just go drop it off at the front desk and they're happy to take them. They do it all year round, and they have a list on their website if you guys are interested in donating to them.
All right, great job, Greta. I'm so excited for you that you get to drop everything off today. That'll be really cool. All right, next up I have Michaela.
Okay, I'm gonna share my screen. Can you guys see it? Okay, so I volunteered at a homeless shelter in Portsmouth during my January term last year. And what it consisted of was we arrived at like 5 and we let all the guests in, like we had to sign them up and seat them at the tables and stuff. And then around like 6 and 7, we passed out food and drinks for their dinner. And then we played games with them and allowed them to eat and engaged in conversations. And then after that, we picked up all the trash and then made them feel comfortable. We had to pass out their mats and blankets. And then we put all their belongings in like different bags with their names on it. And I feel like my volunteer hours somewhat went with our class time. And during the law part and the jurisdiction part, because some people have to appear before the court for them to make the decision of if they want to go to rehab or a facility to like get taken care of or to talk about feelings and stuff. And then some of the leaders do refer some of the people that go to the homeless shelter to have counseling done so they can explain like what they're feeling. And then I feel like most of my volunteering didn't really go with the class because it's more of an issue than something that can be fixed in a reasonable time period. Like when we talked about policemen and stuff, like that part didn't go with the class really. And I feel like my service learning project was more of a research gap rather than focusing on what we learned in the textbook. And the hours that we did were like 5 p.m. to 11 p.m., 6 p.m. to 12 a.m. And then on Fridays, we did the overnight, and Saturdays, we did overnight too. And one of my favorite things about volunteering at the shelter was getting to know the people and listening to their backstory on how they ended up where they were. And it also makes me realize how hard it would be to be in their position and how thankful I should be. That's all.
All right, thank you very much, Michaela. Yeah, it's interesting to think about how did these things intersect. So that's cool. All right, so next up is going to be Kenzie, Jackie, and Carly. And Emily, I saw your message, so you will be summoned.
Hey guys, let me share my screen really quick. Can y'all see that? Oh, that's not what I wanted to do. Get away. So this might be a little bit repetitive because we kind of did something very similar to Greta's project, but we also did a drive for the Samaritan House. So we'll try to not keep it as least repetitive as possible. But Kenzie's going to talk a little bit about the site itself.
All right, so the Samaritan House provides housing, case management, counseling, victim advocacy, transportation, medical assistance, food assistance, group therapy, job training, and many more. And this can help victims who might have suffered from domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking, or homelessness. The mission of the Samaritan House is to foster personal safety, growth, self-sufficiency in adults and their children through freedom from sexual domestic violence and other things.
Yeah, so we really liked working with them. They were kind of like Greta said, just really excited for any donations at all. We did a supply drive, so we emailed them and we got a super long list of goods that they were in need of. Some of the ones that you don't normally think about was like bed sheets. They were really desperate for bed sheets. And then feminine hygiene products, clothing, even diapers for little kids, stuff like that. So we made flyers and we posted this on social media to try to get donations. We didn't really get a huge turnout like Greta and them said they did. I'm not sure if that was because of COVID or what was going on. But anything helps, and we're able to give them some products. So here's an example of one of the posters we made. You can see there's things on here like laundry detergent and toilet paper, paper towels, like the everyday necessities that we kind of take for granted, they were in desperate need of.
So at the Samaritan House, when we're kind of looking at psychology and the law, they help victims who have dealt with various legal matters at some point in their lives. And some of the primary legal issues that they help with are that of domestic violence and sexual assault cases. And the victims who suffer from sexual assault tend to be at a higher risk of dealing with various other psychological issues. So the Samaritan House's goal is to kind of ensure that the victims don't suffer from some of these psychological issues, such as PTSD, depression, or suicidal ideation. And that's a major aspect of their program, where they help ensure that the victims are not going to be feeling that they're blamed for what has happened to them. And they really just are trying to take care of their victims properly and make sure that they're going through the court cases properly. Next slide. So at the Samaritan House, they focus on finding kind of ways to address the numbers and help those in those situations. And like discussed in class, oftentimes we notice how in these situations, those who are performing the abuse are more likely to be unemployed or less educated and members of minority groups or lower socioeconomic classes. And that's one major philosophy at the Samaritan House, is that they're not going to discriminate against any individual based on ethnicity, language, race, age, ability, sex, gender, sexual orientation, family status, income, immigrant or refugee status, amongst so many other things. So they're really just focusing on those non-discriminatory practices, because oftentimes we find that the abused are going to be a part of a very discriminized aspect of our society. The victims who find their way to Samaritan House typically are dealing with sexual assault or domestic abuse, like I said, which we talk about a lot in class. And these women tend to find themselves in that common cycle of abuse, which starts with that tension building phase, followed by that acute battering phase, and then finishing with the compression or honeymoon phase. So unfortunately, while we weren't able to interact with them, we could see in the mission statement itself how the Samaritan House is just trying to help these women find their way out of these toxic cycles. And finally, at the Samaritan House, they kind of focus on trying to help these individuals feel safe and comfortable, like I mentioned before, following their traumatic experiences. So this kind of goes along with the various rape myths that we have discussed this semester. And far too often, women are made to feel that they are responsible for preventing their own rapes or that they were asking to be raped and wanted it. So that's a big aspect of what we talk about a lot and what we see there at the Samaritan House. So that's pretty much all we had, though. Thank you, guys.
I can't remember. Did she say I was going next? Did anybody hear her? I think she said.
I think so, Emily.
Thanks, guys. Sorry, I was receiving a phone call and she said that. So I guess I'm just gonna go since she's not here right now. But so for my service learning project, I actually volunteered as a victim advocate intern with Samaritan House. So by the way, what you guys did is awesome, getting all of those donations because they are very much in need. And so Samaritan House, like everyone said in the past few presentations, that it's a nonprofit human services organization that provides assistance like emergency housing, victim advocacy, trauma counseling, etc., to victims who are fleeing domestic violence and human trafficking. The victim advocates I worked with specifically helped victims of domestic violence, mostly those in need and wanting to get out of their intimate partner violence situations. Over the course of the internship, I gained the ability to have my own individual interactions with clients and would make appropriate referrals to meet their needs. Some of my tasks included accompanying clients to court, answering questions about legal proceedings, connecting clients to trauma counseling offered by partnering organizations, educating clients on the dynamics of domestic violence, like the cycle of abuse, like Jackie just mentioned, and assisting clients with filing for protective orders, custody, child, and spousal support. The experience relates heavily to psychology and the law, as it gave me the opportunity to see the very real effects domestic violence has on victims, while also seeing how the legal system deals with these kinds of situations. It showed me what potential consequences exist for victims when things are not handled properly or when the outcome of their cases did not go in their favor. In the same breath, I also witnessed cases where everything was done properly, or for the most part done properly, and our clients were able to feel empowered and gain a sense of safety throughout their experience. In class, we covered the psychology of victims and conditions like PTSD. And almost every victim that we worked with suffered from PTSD or depression and anxiety as a result of experiencing a history of abuse and surviving acts of violence that caused them to experience symptoms related to being close to death. For example, a lot of the clients that we worked with and who came into shelter were victims of strangulation. So because it was common, I was able to identify some of the symptoms of PTSD that we covered in class. Some of the common things that clients would experience were dissociative reactions, inability to remember details of an event, negative beliefs about themselves, and constantly reliving the event. And then we also talked about the concept of rape myths and victim blaming.
did she leave? Or did she like get cut out for you guys?
Yeah, that's why I logged back out and logged back in. I was confused.
Yeah, I was about to say
Yeah, I was
something.
very
I was like,
confused as well.
yeah, I
thought
couldn't
it was
tell if
my
it was my
internet.
computer. I think she got kicked off. Like I think something happened to her Wi-Fi.
Okay. Well, I was supposed to go after her, so I guess I'll just go ahead and go. And then if she comes back on, I'll just like
Do we maybe want to wait like just another minute just to see if she can get back on?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, we can try.
Just like, another like 60 seconds or so. Because I know Dr. Mars is recording this, so she can just like go back and watch.
She just texted me and she said her Zoom crashed.
Oh no.
Oh, Emily, you're muted.
Okay, sorry. I don't know where I left off. Seems like I had some Wi-Fi problems. So
the last word I heard was victim blaming.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. So I don't know what just happened, but I think I figured it out. Hopefully it will not happen again. It's only a little bit left. So, we talked about victim blaming and as it pertains to domestic violence situations and how outsiders tend to ask, why didn't they just leave? All of that kind of stuff. And, the textbook talks about how women who experience repeated beatings from their abusers often give in to the belief that they are helpless and incapable of taking control into their own lives. This is something that I commonly saw clients experience, as well as feeling shameful as a result of the immense amount of emotional abuse that they have been faced with. So some of the ways that I saw the victim advocates combat this sort of learned helplessness and shame was by educating clients on the cycle of abuse and domestic violence dynamics, having them practice decision-making skills, and then also allowing them to create their own safety plans. Safety plans were a really big part of that internship. Also conducting danger assessments to see like for eligibility of emergency housing, things like that. But my experience at Samaritan House was incredibly rewarding, educational, and eye-opening. And it helped me understand better the dynamics of domestic violence. And I'm really, really grateful that I was able to have those client interactions, especially with COVID like this. And so that's all that I have for you. And I'm so sorry about the technical difficulty. Thanks for your patience, everybody.
Well, thank you, Emily. And obviously we all understand since I've been there this semester. And thank you all for being awesome and keeping going. I was typing this, but I'll just say it. I'll go back after the video processes and go ahead and watch those that I missed. But you all are awesome, just keeping rolling. Super cool. I now have an air conditioning unit in my bedroom, so hopefully I'll be able to sleep today. Alrighty. So after Emily, Annika wanted to go. So we'll turn it over to her. And then if folks have an idea they want to go next, you can message me while Annika's presenting.
Okay, so I had a super hard time finding volunteering something to do. So I'm going to write about the time or talk about the time that I helped in a bipartisan organization register Virginian voters and re-register ex-felons. And I did that for about a month and a half or so back in like 2000, either 16 or 14. So this was a while ago. So there was not much I could do considering I couldn't handle people's sensitive information like their social security numbers and stuff. And I didn't know all that much about voting, considering at the time I was like 14 or 15 and I didn't really care about politics like I do now. So mainly my jobs consisted of cold calling, which I hated, sitting at a table, waiting for people to come up to me so that I could talk them through the process of what comes along with voting, the actual form they have to fill out, what was going on for the upcoming local elections at the time, how they would know where to vote, as well as whenever I would have people who would say, I'm an ex-felon, how do I register? I would tell them that I couldn't personally do anything, but they would have to, in order to be eligible to re-register to vote again, they would have to write a letter to the governor to be pardoned. And then what they should do after the request was granted, it would be sent to them in the mail. So I think this could be related to psychology because honestly, it tested my patience. I dealt with many people who decided to take their anger out on me for no reason. And it was, in essence, a learning experience of patience and not letting people's words agitate me to the point of physical retaliation. Like, there was one lady in particular who was just convinced that I was trying to steal her information and that I wanted a specific party to win, even though, you know, I'm bipartisan, so it didn't really matter. But yeah, it was just small things like that that was just really irritating. And I would consider that a more macro level approach when looking at psychology in the law. And I believe that it's still relevant, even though, because I was a volunteer, I did interact with a lot of people and I had to overcome like the mental obstacles of letting their words get to me. So in order to be a little bit more accurate, I'm also going to include the person that I interviewed because I feel like their job is a lot, it's a better representation. So I interviewed Daje, who works as a property management intern for the Virginia Beach Community Development Corporation. And her jobs are to provide subsidized housing to homeless veterans, ensure that they have accurate treatment plans, ample resources, and conducting meetings for her non-compliant clients. And I feel like this relates to psychology and law because of all the mental disorders like PTSD, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia that her clients have, and each one has to have an individualized plan because of the complexities and extremes they deal with on a daily basis. And because her clients are court orders to go to the community and are examined constantly by her supervisor, who is a clinical forensic psychologist. So for both my experience and Daje's experience, the assessment of people are the common subjects that relate to the class because on a macro level, the people I encountered, and on a micro level or more direct level, her clients who have to be clinically assessed as either safe or a danger to themselves and those around them, which is why they would be put in the community. I also feel like for mine, it's relevant because, you know, you have to be a registered voter in order to be a juror in the future. And so I would assume that sometime in their future, they could possibly be put in a court. So that's just a speculation that I have. I'm not really sure. But anyway, let's see. So both of these experiences also can be contrasted to the course because I don't think that they're referred to too much, if at all, in the textbook or the class lectures that I remember. These are both jobs that don't necessarily require degrees in psychology or criminal justice, and they would have no need to be in a textbook. So I guess that would count as a research gap. But overall, even though these jobs are not the jobs thought of when asked about psychology in the law, like we were in the beginning of the semester, they're both necessary because they have an impact on the future decisions of who will be in charge of communities, jurisdictions in the country, as well as, well, and that goes for the voting, the registering to vote. Oh, and as well as determining if a veteran is capable of living on their own without becoming a danger to their neighborhood due to an accidental trigger from an undiagnosed disorder. And that's all.
All right, thank you very much. Next up on the list, I have Alexis.
Give me one moment, please. I hope I'm doing this right. Okay. Okay, so for my service learning project, I chose to volunteer at the Samaritan House as well. again, repeated information. The Samaritan House is a nonprofit organization that provides personal safety and personal guidance to victims, specifically in the Hampton Roads region, who have experienced sexual assault, domestic violence, homelessness, as well as human trafficking. The Samaritan House offers support programs, services such as case management, emergency and permanent housing, victim advocates, and children's programs to encourage the specific needs that are requested for specific clients. So I had the opportunity to volunteer with the donations department. My tasks and responsibilities consisted of sorting through contributed donations, keeping each section within the department organized, create home and shelter baskets, make sure items got to clients, and inform donators about our donation cycle. These are actual pictures of what I organize and how we organize different appliances, necessities, food banks. So in class recently, we talked about the psychological impacts on victims. We discussed the different effects of sexual assault and how victims of sexual assault are more likely to commit suicide and or partake in drug use. And in the donations department, one of my tasks was to sort through all the donations. One of the points of sorting through donations is so that we keep contributions that are neat and up to date, because most of the time when people donate, most of the time they're just emptying out their house, like getting rid of things. So we kind of thoroughly go through to make sure things are things are neat and nice for us to keep, for people to actually use. And another point was to make sure there was no components within the items being kept that could potentially cause the client to harm themselves. For example, there were a lot of purses that were donated and coats. And sometimes people wouldn't even empty out their purses. So I found personal drugs in there, like prescriptions and Tylenol, and one of the purses had nail clippers and one of the pointy nail filers. So we kind of make sure we empty out, things that are in there that could cause harm to the clients. We also discussed the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. So one symptom of PTSD is experience of traumatic events, and we talked about how sexual violation is its own traumatic experience. So individuals with PTSD see the world as dangerous. We also talked about that. And in donations, sometimes caseworkers bring clients to the donations department, and I would help find necessities they need. I would also give them a bag to carry all of their stuff in and make them feel like they have support, even in the donations department. Also, when clients go into emergency housing, donations provides them with a shelter kit to take with them. And when preparing the kit, I would add extra miscellaneous things like journals, so if they wanted to write out how they felt, or we had inspirational cards in there. So we would put those in there. For females, we had a couple of new makeup bags. So I put some makeup bags in there just to make them, feel special and they have people who, a support system who cares about them. Some differences that I learned from my experience, based off of, some differences that I learned from my experience. One, human trafficking mainly targets young victims who could be exposed to sex trafficking, forced labor, or domestic servitude. And the Samaritan House so far has served mostly victims who experience sex trafficking. And this is also a traumatic experience for victims. Again, with sorting donations, I had to be careful when deciding what kind of clothes to keep or not to keep. In the clothing boutique, the goal is to have more modern day styles available, because most victims that come in are young, like they're in their 20s, 20 to 24. So we try to keep like a more modern day style in like the clothing boutique, but most of the styles worn today are very revealing to the body and create attention. So to keep a pair of pants like with the design like on butt pockets, or even like a pin skirt suit that has splits on the back of the skirt would not be a good idea, because clothes like that can trigger victims of human trafficking. I also learned that exposure of any form of violence as well as homelessness can affect children of all ages. It can create psychological effects, behavioral effects, and just like it could affect their everyday life. Some people who come to the Samaritan House looking for help bring their children with them, because they bring them out of that environment as well. And in donations, I also collected brand new supplies from, I know a school donated a box of crayons and colored pencils. So I collected those. And I also helped create what we called backpack on the go that we gave to kids, and they had their own little personal book bag. And we put colored pencils in there, pens, regular pencils, crayons. We even put their own hygiene necessities in there, like toothbrush, toothpaste, comb, brush. If they wanted to put their clothes in there, they could. And we also added coloring books and whatever activity books we had. And overall, based on my experience, I kind of learned that no matter what job you have, if you're working with victims of any type of abuse, it is essential to have knowledge of the different mental effects that can be caused, as well as to keep in mind of confidential information for safety of the client and their family. So that's all I have. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for sharing. That was a really cool way of tying everything together. That makes a lot of sense. That's awesome. Alrighty, so next up is Lilia, and then Tacey will be after her.
Okay, hi everyone. I have my AC running in the back, so hopefully you guys can hear me, but I'll try and talk loud. So I volunteered at EVMS, which is Eastern Virginia Medical School, and this was my internship for this semester, so I just like doubled it for this too. My duties were to conduct research on second victim support programs, and evaluations for second victim support programs. And a second victim is basically someone who's experienced an adverse event, and this was specifically in healthcare professions, so like doctors, nurses, surgeons, people like that. And like an adverse event could be making a mistake that costs a life, making a mistake that severely hurts your patient, or honestly anything along the lines of a mistake in the medical field, which could just be a lot of things. Then I created an evaluation for our specific program at EVMS, and I had to complete annotated bibliographies and a literature review, which compiled all of the research together. This related to psychology and the law mainly through HIPAA and just confidentiality in general. We didn't talk much about HIPAA in class, but it is a big part of healthcare professions. And mainly the way we looked at it was with keeping things confidential and anonymous. HIPAA has a privacy rule which ensures that health information of individuals is properly protected. So obviously, like we all know, our doctors can't share stuff without our permission, and they can only share it to the people we give permission to share. And this is really important for what we were doing, because for us, when we conducted surveys on what they wanted in a support program, they wanted things that were confidential and anonymous. Those were the top things for them. And it made it somewhat hard for us to gather data and evaluate the program while keeping things anonymous. So we're still honestly working on finding a way around this, because it's kind of inappropriate to ask someone to complete a survey after they've been through counseling, you don't really just want to be like, oh, and can you tell me how that was for you? And since it's anonymous, you can't really contact them again without finding out who they are. So we're still working on that part. The way that I related it to a point in the class and something we learned about was that we also talked about burnout in police, which can actually be along the same lines as burnout with healthcare workers. They both can experience burnout and its byproducts such as emotional exhaustion and depersonalization, because you're dealing with lives being in your hands at some points, and in both professions you can experience adverse events and mistakes. Like, we see the news all the time, we know what's happening, like it happens with police and it also happens with doctors, so that's definitely a very similar thing. In medical professionals, burnout is usually because of an adverse event, but in police, it's usually caused by being in their field for too long and like just getting into like a routine that isn't really serving them a purpose anymore. I guess they just get kind of bored with it or whatever. But yeah, that's how I relate it to class. And I think that's it besides my source. So yeah, I think that's it.
Great job. I really liked how you tied that together. That was awesome. All righty. Next up, I have Tacey, and then Jordan is going to be after her.
All right, can you guys hear me? Okay. So for my service learning project, it wasn't as hands-on as I was hoping it was going to be because I wanted to do ride-alongs and we couldn't do that this year. But I do have a friend who currently works at the Virginia Peninsula Regional Jail up in Williamsburg. And so he got me in 2 night shifts to like follow him around and learn what they do there. And we didn't really talk about corrections, but we did talk about the psychology of police. So that's what I'm going to revolve this around. Some of my tasks were mainly just following him around and doing what he told me. Let's see, I pulled it up. So we did stand medical watch, which is just making sure that the inmates were okay, like during nighttime, like no one's blood pressure fell. We kept an eye out for the epileptic inmates in case like any of them had seizures or any of that. We also had razor duty, which was just prepping razors in bags with the inmate's name to hand out the next morning. And the inmates had to show like identification and all that stuff to get it. And if they wanted a new razor, they had to send in like a written report as to why they needed a new one, as well as turning in their old one. Since I was shadowing him from 11 p.m. to like 4 a.m., all of the inmates were sleeping. There were a few who stayed awake, and we just got told to like tell them to be quiet if they were being too loud. I relate this project to the police officers rather than the inmates because they have a huge turnaround in corrections. Nobody wants to be a corrections officer because it's not as like exciting as being a police officer. So they deal with burnout because they're working all these shifts, like super long hours. They have no social life. And they also are in such a negative environment that it really affects their mental health as well. And they also have to get physical sometimes with these inmates. So not only are they dealing with mental health problems, but they also are like get physically hurt when they have to break up fights and stuff. What else did I write here? So their training is similar to like the ones that police officers have to go through. It's not as intense. They still have to take their polygraph exam. They still have to do written exams, and they also have physical tests. It's just not as long and intense. So what else did I write? Sorry, I have my sticky notes with me and I'm trying to keep up with all of them. Yeah, I know one thing is observing all of the corrections officers that were there. They just did not seem happy to be there. Like it just isn't a positive environment. They all look tired. And when you ask them about their job, they don't really want to speak highly of it. They're like, yeah, we're basically just babysitting a bunch of adults. because that's what they do. It's not fun. A lot of them said that this isn't like their end goal as well. Like they want to keep working their way up in law enforcement and eventually become police officers as well. This is just like the start where they're needed. So that's pretty much it. It's not as exciting as everybody else's because I wasn't able to do a lot of hands-on while I was there.
Hey, it sounded exciting to me. It's just to sort of see that, and you got to directly observe what it's like for them, right? So I think that that's important for us to know about. So
I should also mention, I'm going to bring up one more thing. When it does come to the inmates, like their mental health is taken way more seriously than the actual police officers there. So if an inmate, like say they try to commit suicide or want to harm other people, like they actually go to therapy. There are psychologists there who help them and talk to them. And rather than like, if say a police corrections officer, even a police officer needs help, like they're looked down upon. But if an inmate gets hurt, like the jail can get sued for that by family for them not taking proper care of them. So
yeah, actually, the jail in Chesapeake has had a lot of problems with that, and they're going to close it now because of that. So,
oh wow.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing. That was really interesting to me, at least. So awesome. All right, Jordan is up next, and then if other folks want to volunteer, feel free to just message me in the chat.
Can you guys hear me? Okay. So I had an internship as well that I'm using for this. I worked at the Center for Child and Family Services. My main programs were domestic violence and substance abuse. But since there was a bunch of different programs there that I could observe, I chose Safe Harbor. So Safe Harbor is a supervised visitation and coaching program at Center for Child and Family Services. The program is designed to maintain or establish healthy relationships among custody battles, depending on whether it's parents or guardians when the children is pulled from with CPS. And then the coaching is designed to educate parents or parental figures on skills for raising children suffering from the trauma that they are experiencing from whatever their issue is being taken. So the task that I completed within supervised visitation is I observed visitation, meaning like there was 2 different playrooms, and in the middle of it like was the mirrors. So you like physically sit in this little doorway thing. Like I don't know, it's kind of hard to explain. And you're watching like legit literally every interaction and behavior that goes on within the visitation, depending on whoever it's with. And while doing that, I would document notes in like SOAP format, which is subjective, objective, assessment, and plan. So like subjective notes would be literally everything that the person is saying or doing. So you would say like, the child is hugging the father, the child is playing blah, 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 they said, I love you, like things like that. Very objective or subjective. Objective is like the measures that you're measuring, assessment, and then as well as the plan on future goals. So basically all my tasks were just to sit there and observe people visit and hang out and play games and play with toys. So this related to psych and law psychology, as in like children's and teens developing psychological disorders and issues from being passed along, whether it's child protective services or between family members within custody orders, because they are not properly taken care of, or if it's just a regular like custody divorce. As far as the law, it depends on the severity of case where that the law justifies verdict of behavior decided by court system. So for example, the law gets involved depending on like how severe the case is. For one example, we had a little child who she had custody from her mom, and then her mom was a terrible mother, didn't really raise her, so the grandparents did. But then the grandparents got custody rights at like the father's parents, and the mom kidnapped her and took her to a whole different country. So there was a whole custody battle between that. So then that was like a whole court system and then ordeal And then as far as law as well, a lot of the assessments were a common factor too, because there was a lot of like biopsychosocial factors, the M-ways, and assessments like that. And so within custody battles, depending on like the severity of the case, they children and family go through multiple assessments. It's not just within our program at Safe Harbor, they go through the assessments within the court system. So where the forensic psychologist would assess the like psychological factors of the child and to determine the situation, how they're not properly cared for. And then they would also involve the community around them, involving that family, involving the children, like teachers and parents or people that take care of the child or that interact with the children on in an everyday basis. So then also for Safe Harbor experience, I think there is also a bridge gap between psychology and the law and what I focused on, which was child custody, because majority of what we talked in class is all about like major crimes, and a lot of the major crimes are glorified or gets a lot more publicity, unless especially like murders and things like that. And the only times it really does with children is unless it involves like big sexual cases or like really severe issues, not just minor issues that still impact kids and psychologically as well. So, and then that's all.
That's great, Jordan. Thanks for really describing your experiences. You know, having never done supervised visitation myself, it is sort of interesting to hear, you know, what that experience is like. And sounded like touching at points, so that's good.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like there's another example, like this one girl, she was in a case where both her parents, they would, in their assessments, make claims that the one parent was partaking in like sexual misconduct or sexual activity using the child, and they both made claims about it. So then it became this like huge sexual assault involving the child, and you could just see like physically watching, you could see the interactions of just like their immoral and their bad behavior, and because they just don't know like how to really interact with that person because they don't get to see them that often. They weren't really raised by them, and they're involved, like even if they were involved, I don't know the case, but if they were involved in that sexual like activity with their parents, like or whatever their parents put them through, it was just like a lot of trauma. So they were just, you could see just the like awkward and just interesting behaviors that childs do. Like they don't even, some kids didn't even know really like what to do with toys or like what to do with the people that they were visiting.
That's so heartbreaking. Well, thank you for sharing. That's good to hear about, you know, this impact. So I put the next 4 people in the chat, and then actually after Hayden, Stephen's gonna go, so we know our next 5. So if you all just want to sort of like go next, you can, or I can break it in between. So, but Sherelle is up next.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Can you all see it? Okay, for my service learning project, I volunteer at an organization called My Sister's Place in Washington, D.C. Their main focus is, where their main mission, okay, is it not? Okay, there we go. Is to help and support domestic violence survivors and their children by placing them in new homes and providing them with the necessary resources to succeed in their new environment. Some of the resources that this organization provides are, sorry, one of my roommates is moving out. Organization provides are meals, women empowerment groups, children's programs, fundraising for survivors, remodeling of shelters and homes, and professional and unique skill training. Another event that I really like that they do is they do Mother's Day brunches as well as spa days for the women. My experience, I volunteered as a male volunteer and a seasonal project volunteer. So that consisted of me providing and serving meals to the survivors and their families, for their children specifically. And I did that on Saturdays and Sundays. And I was also a seasonal project volunteer, which meant that I helped with whatever current projects they had going on at the time. And at that time, I assisted with a clothing, personal care item, and toy drive. So with that, we ask the community for any type of donations. For clothing, we ask for new clothes, and for personal care items, like all items. And then we ask for new or fairly used toys for the children. And then, as you can see here in the pictures, we separated those based off of age group and gender of the children. Why is this important? As we learned in class, over 1.3 million women are affected by domestic violence. From this experience, I received hands-on experience on how you should treat individuals affected by domestic violence. And I was also able to observe how survivors reacted towards strangers and how they were able to deal with their traumatic experiences. And the reason I say I was able to see how they reacted with strangers, because when I first started working there, they didn't know me. So when I would like provide meals or things, like they would talk to some of the other people, but they would kind of like look at me like, who is she? Where did she come from? And things like that. But one thing that I do know about this organization is that you have to go through a background check in order to be able to volunteer with them, because they focus with people that have been extremely affected by domestic violence. So they need to make sure that every person that is coming to work with them has good intentions. And they do not allow, the only time you are allowed to see or know where an individual lives is if you are helping them move in, and that's very rare. Some of the similarities and differences from class. I already said this, many of the women were reluctant to speak to me when I first started volunteering. So to me, that was a sign of the flat effect or persistent avoidance. And most of the survivors were escaping abuse from their partners, which I did also notice was a similarity between class. Some of the differences that I noticed was that they were not evasive or lashing out. Most of them were kind of calm or quiet. And I don't know why I was expecting this, but I expected for there to be like some kind of psychologist or psychiatrist there at some point, especially with the children that were involved or that watched their mother get abused. But I did not notice that for myself. And then the last slide is just some pictures of me with the items, basically. We were not allowed to take pictures like with the individuals, of course, but I did get pictures of us bringing in some of the donations. And that is all.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing. Yeah, I think that unfortunately, psychologists' time ends up being pretty expensive. So unless they're willing to donate it, right, a lot of these organizations can't afford anyone. So it's sad. It's really sad that everyone should have access to it. Alrighty, next up is Danny.
All right. So I kind of had a pretty hard time trying to find one, but I ended up doing some volunteer hours at the York County Mental Health Services, which is where I'm from. And because of like COVID restrictions and a whole lot of their company like policies and everything like that, I couldn't really do too much for them. So I ended up just more or less transporting everybody to get their COVID vaccines. But essentially, it kind of operates a system of halfway houses for people who have been in institutions for most of their lives. And they kind of work with a psychiatrist and a social worker, and they're trying to become more functioning members of society. And I mean, the intersection for psychology and the law is a lot of them were involved in the criminal justice system at one point or another. And they received like a lot of training on how to kind of properly deal with that. And it really wasn't that different from what class was. The only major like kind of weird thing is they refer to all of their clients as consumers, which I still don't really fully understand, but that was kind of the only main difference. And that was just about it, really. I wish I could have learned more about it, but with everything else that was going on, there's only so much I could do.
Yeah, well, and I think you did one of the most important tasks, honestly. Driving them to their COVID vaccines is so vital right now. And that's great that they're getting access because at times people are forgetting people with, mental health issues rather than physical health issues. So that's great. Yeah, let me talk briefly about the term consumer. So they use that term when I was at the Medical College of Georgia as well. And the idea is, okay, so like in the medical model, we call people patients, and then typically psychologists call them clients. And the idea of a client is more empowering than a patient because you're like working with your therapist. Consumer is supposed to be even more empowering, and I want to say client-centered, but consumer-centered, right? And the idea is like they're in the driver's seat. They're the ones who get to decide which care they get. Certainly there are people who advocate for that. I mean, you could argue it sounds like they're like going to Target instead of getting like critical care, right, for their mental health issues. But yeah, so that it is a movement within it. And there's some cool things you can do within that movement. Like at MCG, we had people who recovered enough from their own mental illness who were able to serve in sort of a counseling role for others with mental illness. So they had like a peer counselor there, which was kind of cool. But yeah, thanks for sharing. Very, very cool. Alrighty, so next up is Kaylee Sue. And I love your hair, by the way. It's great.
Thank you. So my volunteer was with Just for Kids daycare. I struggled to find somewhere, but I have a friend who works at the daycare, so she got me an in. So I pretty much just watched like a group of school-aged children. I only went in on Fridays because that's the only time I was available to help. But there was another teacher, so no kids could be real bad when I was there. The way it relates to psychology and the law, so the teachers are in charge of looking out for like possible psychological changes in the children. They're also responsible for reporting to CPS about like unusual bruises or marks. The lady in charge of the daycare also reports to CPS if a teacher goes too far and causes any marks on the children. I expected to interact with CPS more while being there, but I did nothing. I saw nothing compared to it. I think she just did it in her office when there were enough teachers there to watch everyone. But being there, I learned a lot about children and how their role kind of in like how it could be affected in the criminal justice system. Because like their memory, it could be so easily altered that like in the textbook, I remember like eyewitness testimony, they talked about like how it's really important to ask children questions in like very specific ways because you can like alter the way they remember it. And I could totally see how that's very important because like the white lie they tell on accident is crazy. And then like I also learned the importance of confidentiality because they do not know when to not talk. When I walked in one day, one girl just told me her full name, first, middle, last. So I just stuff like that's really important to like keep it to yourself and not share their family's life because they didn't know not to tell you that. So it wasn't exactly like the most exciting. I just sat there and made sure they kept safe and not in trouble. But that's about it.
Okay, great. Yeah, again, it was a hard semester. Didn't, everything wasn't a perfect match. So that's fine. I'm glad that you found some ways to connect it. Alrighty, Hayden, go ahead.
All right, let me pull up my PowerPoint. Okay, and y'all can see that? Okay. So good afternoon. I was able to use my internship hours for my internship for Psych 479 this semester, also for my service learning experience, and I was an activities aid intern at Our Lady of Perpetual Help. So Our Lady of Perpetual Help is an assisted living facility that offers nursing care, dementia care, and extensive assisted living. There are two ends of the building, and I spent semesters working in both ends. One end is the Christopher Center, and that's where the people are who need dementia care. So like that end of the facility is, lots of locked doors and stuff because people with dementia a lot of times are exit seeking. And then the other wing of the building houses residents who need nursing or extensive assisted living care. So the goal of the activities department is to work together and support the social and emotional needs of our residents by coordinating activities for them. Through group activities, residents get social interaction with us and their peers, which helps alleviate symptoms of loneliness and depression, which are unfortunately pretty common. This need was really heightened, especially during the pandemic. Now, of course, it's getting better with vaccine rollouts, but our residents were pretty isolated from family and friends for a while due to the danger that COVID poses to them. Our activities also usually require residents to think and engage cognitively, which has been shown to help maintain brain health and stave off symptoms of dementia. So my tasks would vary slightly from day to day, but my underlying responsibilities were to keep my residents occupied and entertained and make sure that their social needs were being met. From like 10 to 5, we would always have some sort of group activity going on and then try and walk around and do one-on-one visits with people who like didn't want to come out of their room so that everybody, was getting the benefit of social interaction. So this kind of relates to psych and the law because while our textbook didn't have a section specifically about how the elderly and the law, like, what are issues that, happen when they interact with the law, but in our textbook, it does talk about how in order for people to be established as incompetent, they have to not understand court proceedings, the consequences of their actions, and can't assist effectively in their own defense if they were to get in trouble. So it's easy to see how people with dementia, especially in the later stages, would behave in ways that are criminal without understanding the consequences of their actions. Additionally, for people with dementia, if they are determined to be incompetent due to dementia, charges will often be dropped. That's not really an issue for people at my facility, obviously, because they're with us, but for people who are still out with interacting with people on a regular basis, they might get in trouble. One thing that often happens is like theft because they don't understand anymore. So if they're not being watched very well, or for some reason their family isn't nearby to keep an eye on them, and like people just haven't noticed how far they've slipped, a lot of times theft becomes an issue. This is just the stuff about, competent to stand trial. And another aspect of competency that we talked about is a lot of times that there will be work done to restore people to competence so that they can face trial. But with people with dementia, obviously, it's not really reversible. It's in cases like Alzheimer's. Like, we all know, Alzheimer's, it just gets worse. You can't restore them to competency. There's no cure for Alzheimer's. So in that respect, a lot of times, if it can be established like, oh, their actions were due to their dementia, they can't help it, charges will just be dropped because you can't restore them. Another legal issue that often arises out of concern for competency is establishing power of attorney. So with the elderly, sudden changes in health, especially mental health, can be sudden and drastic, resulting in issues of competency when it comes to important decision making, especially with health issues, because we know elderly people have health issues. For this reason, it's recommended to have a power of attorney document signed and filed just in case something were to happen to that person. They could no longer make decisions for themselves. A power of attorney document essentially just delegates a person who is in charge of making decisions for another party should they become incapacitated. So for a lot of my residents, these were their children or siblings. This usually is done with attorneys when people are finalizing their will. So a lot of people, have a power of attorney even if they aren't in facilities like mine. It's very, very important to already have a POA chosen when you won't need one, because when you really need one, you need to have already had one, because if somebody has already slipped into incompetency, you can't go back and now establish a power of attorney, and it becomes, it's a lot harder at that point. And then also a piece of legislature that's important in the healthcare field is HIPAA. HIPAA was passed in the 90s. It mandates that healthcare providers protect patient confidentiality when handling their medical information. HIPAA also extends a lot of other protections, but this is the one that was, most relevant to me and what I did every day. The purpose of people moving into facilities like Our Lady is so that they can have round-the-clock access to healthcare, which means nurses and CNAs are constantly administering care in front of me. So I was also, even though I wasn't, administering medical care, I was also bound to HIPAA, because a lot of times I would be witnessing or hearing like, oh, we're going to go give this person her tramadol or whatever, so I was still privy to that information. So it was important that I knew, how HIPAA works, and so that I would also maintain patient confidentiality. And that's all for me.
All right, great. Thanks for sharing, Hayden. Yeah, for some reason I hadn't thought about the competence issue, and that makes a lot of sense with folks with dementia. So yeah, thanks for sharing and thinking about it that way. Alrighty, next up is Stephen and then Savasia. And then again, anyone who hasn't gone, go ahead and give me when you want to go next in the chat.
Hey guys, for my service learning paper, because of COVID, it was like kind of difficult for me to find a place like all of you guys. So I contact Professor Myers, and I told her that I did kind of like a community service or something like that in a rehab center for it was like a rehab and homeless center for people in Puerto Rico. The place is called Hogar Crea, and it's a rehab center for people who were struggling with severe addictions. And I went there for a whole weekend. I did a couple hours on Friday. I start on Saturday in the morning, and then I got off like at 5, and then kind of like a couple hours on Sunday. And it was kind of like a collaboration between a local church, and a medical center from that same area. So they were looking for volunteers in the weekend, and me and some of my friends volunteer with the medical center. So my tasks there were I were 16 in the clinics, assisting to professionals that were talking to some groups about how they can overcome certain addictions. Also, we did some like food drives, and there were people, local barbers that volunteered to give them haircuts and all that kind of stuff. The relations with the class, I would say that definitely when I was doing this project, one of them was the drug court. Many of them have never passed through that process, and they were kind of like surprised when professionals were kind of like talking to them about the drug court, and they would say like they have never heard of that. Most of them passed that process, and some of them know about the process, but they didn't want to go through that process because they don't trust the system. And the other relation with the class, it's that I remember the lecture of punishment and sentencing, when Dr. Myers talked about the mental health courts and how mentally people used to have like a high rate of incarceration, but little approach on mental health treatment. And I remember also some of them, patients that were at that center saying like, I am sick, I don't need like punishment, I just need treatment, I just need someone to help me. And others talk about the fact that they were in prison with people that committed serious crimes, and they were just there because they were harming themselves or sick. So many of the people that I was working with, and me as well, we learned a lot those 3 days that we went there. And I will say that the project, when I did it, it was really interesting, and it was really like eye-opening to see the reality of some of these people that when we're growing up and we sing up the streets, we say, oh, here's that man that doesn't like control himself, or he choose that pattern, something like that. And sometimes we lack of empathy, and sometimes they have a lot of background stories that we just need to, be on their shoes to really understand them. So now with the help with this class and on that project that I did, I can like clearly see how there were some factors that these people were missing in this rehab center. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, Stephen. That's a perfect match with what we've talked about in class. Yeah, I mean, the fact that ever since deinstitutionalization, if people want help, they end up in jail most of the time, right, where there isn't help available. It's really, really sad. All right, Savasia, you're up next.
Okay, hold on one second. Okay, so honestly, I had a terrible time finding something earlier. I was planning to do volunteering at the Samaritan House, but I didn't think I had enough time to get the training I needed to do that. So did something else. Did it based off of an experience I had from, I think, about 2 years ago. I worked with a counseling service called AIM Family Services, and essentially it is what its name says. It's a family counseling service. It's Black owned. It was local here in Norfolk, Virginia, and is actually in collaboration with one of the a boarding school that's also in that area as well. So they were kind of like the counseling service in the school, which was kind of nice. So since that service actually isn't no longer like, in service right now, temporarily, I had to contact my old supervisor and go through some things with her about that. So I had to do it virtually. But essentially my role when I was volunteering prior to was to act as an observer during these sessions, after getting approved, of course, from the clients and their parents, to sit and listen to their personal information just for confidentiality reasons. But most of the cases that I did sit and listen in on obviously weren't like, I don't want to say like not serious, because all cases are serious, but they weren't drastic in that like sense of like violent harm or like self-harm or any of that. Like it was just really family services that I listened to. So during those sessions, I would go through like a checklist that contained criteria to basically outline the next course of action for treatment. We do refer to them as clients, not patients, because they are clients. They can choose what form of treatment they want to go through as a family or as a single person. And most cases, some cases with the kids, they did have issues at home, and some of those issues did require like the court's involvement. But my supervisor wouldn't have to go in necessarily every time because it didn't get to that point. Sometimes, sorry, my window's open if you heard that. Sometimes she would have to go in to kind of back the client up or support her findings from her assessments that she's made. So that's the only kind of tie-in to the law aspect of it. It was mostly psychology. But usually it was just, I just watched assessments and interviews, and actually myself actually got to write down a plan of course of action to help with some cases. So it was actually a really nice experience. And then it was kind of strange doing it again virtually because I had to like sit on it wasn't like a Zoom call, it was like a phone call type situation that I had to sit in on and kind of listen and gauge how the client is feeling that day.
what's the turmoil for, this week, how would they like to proceed from here, that kind of thing. So that was pretty much it. It wasn't really much different from what we learned in class, determining competency, that sort, doing assessments, essentially what clinicians do. So that was the only part that tied into class.
All right, great. Thanks for sharing again. Y'all were super creative during COVID times, so I really appreciate you finding things that match with it. Okay, next up is Casita, and then I believe the only person who has to go after her is Erin. So we're almost there, y'all.
So, like a lot of you, I had a really tough time finding a site to work at. So I ended up pulling from a past experience. Um, and my mom, actually, she is a psychologist, more on the clinical side, but she does a lot of work in the law sector, because a lot of the times when she's doing couples counseling, she has to go to court for child custody. So she's spending a lot of time in court advocating for the children and who would be best to give the child to, so to speak. Not like a child is property, but so I related this to the class because we talked about how in divorce cases, your number one priority is making sure that the child is advocated for, and seeing if the child, for one, has any psychological issues or just any issues in general, and then speaking to the parents to see who um how they act as parents, basically. And it can be difficult because you have parents who get defensive and think that, oh no, I could never do that to my child, or you have people who are on their best behavior when really and truly they're the problem. So she does a lot of work in that regard, and there would be instances where my volunteer hours would come in where she would kind of give me, I don't want to call them pointers, but advice on how to deal with different clients and how to build the interpersonal connections between clients and really make them feel as though they can say what they need to say. We spent a lot of time discussing ways to pick up how to read between the lines, so to speak, and hear what the client is really saying without them having to actually say it. Pick up body language. A lot of profiling went into um, her time with clients as well. And that is where I stepped in, kind of following along and learning and being that side person or that second opinion. Sometimes she would say, well, if you see somebody sitting and you're talking with them and they're kind of avoiding your gaze, they're fidgeting, their palms maybe look a little sweaty, what could that read off to you? And sometimes it would be anxiety. Sometimes it could be lying, things like that. Kind of the micro expressions that we spoke of is a lot of things that she focused on and that she taught me how to do growing up. My mom, she also would go in as a witness in the court system sometimes to just speak on different psychological issues and how that could be effective or not effective, how that could affect the individual on trial to commit crimes, or if it could have hindered them from committing crimes. To my knowledge, and from the instances where I've spoken with her, she has never had to speak on whether or not somebody is competent enough to stand trial. It was more of, here is the crime, here is the person, here are their symptoms. Could symptoms have led up to said crime? If that makes any sense. But a lot of my time specifically was spent learning the tricks of the trade, so to speak, how to interact with people, how to get knowledge, and how to pick up on things that aren't really said or aren't really talked about in the room. And then I also, of course, did a lot of secretarial work, calling clients, filing, all of the fun stuff that you do sitting behind a desk. So yeah, that was my experience. It was always nice growing up to have that just kind of front and center all the time. So yeah.
Alrighty, well, thank you so much for sharing. It sounds like your mom has a really cool job. Maybe next time I'll try to get her as a guest speaker.
Yeah, she's in Africa right now, so she's living her best life.
Good for her. That's awesome. Alrighty. So last but not least, we have Aaron. And if I missed you, send me a message, but I think I got everybody else.
Hi, all right, here, 1 second, let me share my presentation. I don't know what's going on. Okay. There we go. Okay. Present, how am I presenting? Awesome. Okay, back. So my service learning project was with Fields Protective Services, which is a woman-owned security company based out of Brooklyn, New York. I worked with the vice president and head of HR at Fields Protective Services. Her name is Mary Fields. Her and her sister, Carol Fields, came up with the company after Carol retired from the domestic violence unit of the NYPD, which is super cool. Like their whole family is actually NYPD. The other sister, Tawana, actually is the head of forensic science down here in Virginia Beach. So this is from the website. We offer exceptional and personalized security services in Brooklyn, New York, designed to offer you not only the utmost safety, but also peace of mind. Our security personnel is all highly trained professionals with military, police, and security backgrounds. So you can rest easy knowing that your safety is in capable and well-trained hands. So what are they doing to influence psychology and the law? Most notably, they're training their guards to deal with persons who may have issues regarding their mental health. So they're doing like special trainings for that. And they also, because it is all Black women owned, they're used to being part of marginalized groups, and they don't want the citizens that they're protecting feeling that way by their security guards. So they try to often do things to train their guards so they're not having their own implicit biases affect their job. And we definitely talked about in class police training and how long does it take to become a police officer. I thought this related very well, especially considering, like I said, Ms. Fields is the head of HR services at the company, and she's the one hiring people. A lot of what I did was sitting in on interviews, helping her with that. And then I actually ended up making this my internship for Dr. Meyer's other class. So I got to see a lot of like every piece of the business. It was pretty cool. Ms. Fields actually has a psychology degree from Hampton University. So like I said, that's how it's related in class. We also talked about conduct. So I was able to kind of see that firsthand. And this is their website. So yeah, that's my presentation.
Alrighty, awesome job, everybody. Thanks for hanging in throughout the presentation. We actually finished a little sooner than I thought. I thought we'd go to at least 1:30. So woohoo, your time is yours. My plan is to start today and then probably finish tomorrow going through all your stuff and getting your grades posted. Seniors, I'll try to prioritize you so you have it all good to go for graduation. Those of you who are graduating, I will be at the the Birdsong and Brock, so social sciences and natural science graduation on Saturday. So say hi. I'll be in the CMAC, I think, helping y'all get organized, helping the faculty get organized. So yeah, if you have anything outstanding, I would say get it to me by like 5 today, so that I can make sure that I grade it. Hopefully y'all got it in already and you don't even have to worry about it. But I'm available. I'm teaching online. I think I have some of you actually all summer. So if you do need to touch base with me, feel free to email. I do have time set up on my Calendly as well. But yeah, I have really enjoyed this class, and I know how difficult it was doing it remotely. So thank you all for hanging in there, and thank you for being super active in those discussion groups. I thought that worked really well, as well as we could make it work, right? The last thing that will only take you probably 5 minutes max is if you haven't done your self-eval for participation for the second half, that link is on Blackboard. So feel free to go ahead and click that and fill that out. So I'll stick around for a couple minutes. Oh, yeah, it's bittersweet. So proud of y'all, but that means we get to lose you. But at least I'll be able to like see you one more time in person, and you're always welcome back. Homecoming hopefully will be a thing again this coming fall, and usually, a bunch of us are around for that. So, and then, those of you who go on to awesome careers in grad school, keep in touch, and we can always use you for like a panel for people. So, yeah, you get me. I'm excited. Alrighty, well, take care of yourselves, and I will try to have everything in by 5 tomorrow at the latest, so you'll know what your grade is.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye. Have a great summer.
Woo.